Bev, I think it's an important symbolic statement, but it's a low-cost concession. NATO has not pursued membership for Ukraine since 2010, when a pro-Russian leader took power there. So even though this was enshrined in the Constitution in 2019, practically we were talking about NATO and individual members assisting Ukraine, for example, by training their forces. So Zelenskyy can say this. We've had a significant development in the last 15 minutes from Moscow, which is that for the first time, the Kremlin, through spokesman Dmitry Peskov, has set out their terms for a possible resolution. They're saying, okay, Ukraine would be on a status comparable to Sweden and Austria, so quote, neutral. But what that would mean is that in addition to not joining NATO, there would be no foreign bases and no foreign troops in Ukraine. Well, there are no foreign bases in Ukraine right now, and the only troops are a few hundred NATO troops and member state troops involved in this training. So again, if the Kremlin is serious about this would be a fairly low-cost way for Ukraine to say, yeah, we agree to the political terms, while demanding, of course, the withdrawal of Russian forces from the country.
And that is, to your point, quite a statement from Russia if they are serious about it. Does it tell you that they are starting to realise that their campaign in Ukraine is just not going according to plan?
Definitely. I mean, I would have been cautious up to now for two reasons. First, I went through years of watching the Russians in Syria carrying out attacks that killed tens of thousands of civilians and always saying, okay, we'll negotiate while besieging and bombing. And secondly, Vladimir Putin's goal has been to force the surrender of the Ukrainian government and to arrest and kill its leaders. But he failed in that initial objective in the first 48 hours, getting special forces into Kiev, and his ground forces, now more than 3 weeks later, they're stalled. So Russia can bomb Ukrainian cities, but they cannot besiege Kiev or Kharkiv the way that they have those cities on the southern coast. So if they can't even besiege the cities, how are they going to invade and occupy them? I don't think Putin will accept this with good grace, to say the least, but there may be a glimmer that others in the Russian elite facing economic pressure say, look, this is our face-saving way out of this.
Yeah. What about the regions around Donbass that were so critical and were the pretext for this invasion?
Well, I think this does raise issues for Ukraine as we go beyond the question of its status. And let's start first of all with Crimea. Russia's going to demand recognition of its occupation of Crimea, which it seized in 2014. That's going to be very tough for Kiev to agree to, or for the international community to agree to. The Russian proxy forces in the east of Ukraine, look, they've been there for 8 years. You can't remove them at this point. I think in a strange way, it's easier to say, all right, they stay there in the Donbass for now while Ukraine rebuilds and recovers, and then we find a negotiated way to try to make Donbass part of federal Ukraine, even though that will be difficult with Putin still in power.
Yeah. So what is your sense of, we also heard Sergei Lavrov tonight saying that talks have become more business-like. It seems to be a very helpful and positive reinforcement. But how soon might this bring this conflict to an end? I mean, there's still awful bombardments going on of Mariupol. Kiev is also being hit, as you say. There are buildings destroyed, people being held hostage in the most terrible way.
Well, first, I trust Sergei Lavrov as far as I can throw it.
Yes.
And he made a rather bizarre statement that said, okay, one key issue in these talks is people being allowed to speak Russian in Ukraine. People can already speak Russian in Ukraine. So Lavrov is more of muddying the waters and disinformation, in contrast to that Kremlin statement that just came out. But you're quite right to note that the Russians have a long track record of pretending to talk while trying to gain military advantage. So whether or not they're trying to regroup their ground forces to advance and besiege, they are still extending the aerial bombardment, and they're hitting civilians. We had 5 die in Kiev overnight with apartment blocks, a 15-story apartment block hit. We've got 4 dead in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second city. We've got civilians killed elsewhere. So the Russians will continue to try to intimidate and terrorize Ukrainians. The question is the intimidation to buy space for a renewed military offensive, or is it to buy space to find a face saver in the negotiations?
Yeah. And a face saver is probably what they are going to need if this continues for much longer. And then Ukraine digs in. NATO, they're talking again, but we know that they're not going to accede to Zelensky's request for a no-fly zone. What might they do, and how might the considerations of their own presence in Europe now change?
Well, I think the no-fly zone was always off the table, except in the limited case where the Russians occupied most of Ukraine, and then you tried to preserve Western Ukraine near Poland, who is a NATO member. Since the Russians don't look like they're going to occupy most of the country, we don't talk about direct confrontation with the Russians. You continue with the economic and the military aid, which has bolstered Ukraine, perhaps belatedly, but helped it resist. You continue the very quiet discussions going on between the Ukrainian military and other militaries about their tactics. And you continue to bolster Zelensky with these high-profile appearances. UK Parliament last week, Canadian Parliament yesterday, US Congress today. So that international show of solidarity, short of a no-fly zone, is very, very important, as well as the sanctions. And this is the flip side of this. Russian stock market closed now for more than 2 weeks. The Russian currency down 40%. Russia's state rating is now effectively at the level of junk bonds. So Fitch has now downgraded them again and said that a default is imminent. The Russian economy is in a critical situation, which means you continue with the international support for Ukraine, and if the Ukrainian military and Zelensky continue to resist, you've bought your own time to try to get the best terms possible.
Yeah. Scott, appreciate, as always, your analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bev.